Welcome to Deadline, a discussion and critique by some of Washington's most seasoned journalists and pundits on how the media has covered the week's news events without the shouting heard on those other news programs. I'm your host, Dwayne Matson. Joining me on the panel this week are Laura Mandeville, Chief U.S. Correspondent for Le Figaro, Marcello Campon, Washington Bureau Chief for ANSA, the Italian news agency, and Eric Burns with Bullfight Strategies. Welcome everyone to Deadline. The Greek government has fallen over the Greek debt issue and the crippling austerity plans, and joining Greece in financial turmoil is Italy, where Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi is in hot water for not the usual reasons, and the G20 just completed its summit in Cannes with some interesting comments from French President Nicolas Sarkozy to President Obama. With the Occupy Wall Street movement continuing and growing in the bedlam in European capitals, are we seeing the beginning of a major financial meltdown? And how do you think the media is treating this, both here in the United States and abroad? I'll start with you, Laurie.
I think the media are tempted to cover this crisis in a global way because they have all these different financial problems, troubles on both sides of the Atlantic, and they have this social popular movement all around, America and also in Spain and Italy, Greece, France, etc. So there is this temptation to say, well, we're sort of witnessing a huge problem, the political and financial elites not being able to cope with the economic crisis, sort of structural economic crisis, and at the same time the people sort of rising to try to protest and ask for new answers. So that's why I think the press has been trying to do certainly imperfectly.
Mm-hmm. Marcello, now your country, Italy, is the latest country where there's a governmental, basically, collapse. And we've seen it happen in Greece, and now we don't know what's going to happen with Berlusconi. All indications are that he's leaving, but he's, we've counted him out before. Where do you see this? How is this being covered, first of all, in Italy and generally in Europe, and how do you think the United States media has been covering this so far?
I agree with that. This is a financial crisis, but it's a global crisis. And so with the global media, also the timing is really changing because also the political crisis that usually in Italy we had other political crises, but we could wait days, consultation, a lot of debate to go forward. Now the market and the markets cannot wait for our political way of going, and so it's really interesting because everything is absolutely faster, and you have to give people. Yesterday, I covered the showdown of the Italian government from here. It was really interesting that the CNN. I was covering I covered Italian government in my life in the past, and I was here in Washington just 6 hours before. I was doing the same job in some way, and it's really, really interesting. Also, I'm not so old, but I remember a few years ago, 10 years ago, when I started working, it wasn't so easy to go streaming on the website and to cover a debate on other places. And this is really interesting, dangerous, and interesting. Dangerous because sometimes our job, the job of the journalist is to explain what's happening. Mm. And yesterday was quite interesting to see that I knew that the goal yesterday was in the vote of Parliament wasn't to pass the law, because the law will pass because the opposition didn't vote against. The goal was, the topic was to understand if Berlusconi had the majority or not. And this is the magic number is 315, and was 318. Mm. But sometimes in USA they say, "Oh, Berlusconi won. The law passed." It wasn't the case.
Right.
And this is interesting because sometimes you have a lot of information, but if you don't know very well your background, you can make a kind of mistake.
Right. Eric, you've covered how the media deals with these stories. And we have also the Occupy Wall Street movement. We've got this financial breakdown in Europe, possibly Greece leaving the Eurozone. Do you think the media is sophisticated enough? I'm talking about the mainstream here, the 24/7s. Are they sophisticated enough to explain these to the American public, or are they, like Marcello said, they're giving little bits of information without the context?
No, I think Marcello is absolutely right, and this is something that that I've been concerned about for some time. Especially when you get into cable media and cable television news in the States, which takes up a larger and larger share of Americans' media consumption. It's just what I call this ADD media culture that we have, where we need the kind of instant gratification. We need to know, we're in kind of like constant crisis mode. And part of the problem is that these are very, very complicated financial issues that are all deeply intertwined and have a 20-year lead. They go, the beginning of these problems go back 20, 25 years. But there's really, not only is there no one really explaining this in the media, what I found is that, and there are a lot of really fantastic reporters out there, too many of the reporters, with the exception of very specialized reporters at some of the publications that cover the markets, they don't really understand this stuff very, very well. And frankly, neither do members on Capitol Hill. And so it really has created a disaster here. And I think it's also reflected in the type of coverage we get back from what's going on in Greece, what's going on in Italy. There are top lines. Is Berlusconi in? Is he out? In some of the more segmented financial media like CNBC and Fox Business News, which is very, of course, geared toward Wall Street and the market interests, there's a little more in-depth analysis, but it's all about the impact on the markets.
Right.
The journalists, I think, are fundamentally failing to do their job to educate the American people, and as a result, we're all paying a price for it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you would.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to what they're underlining about the dangers, that of the coverage, of a too superficial coverage. And when you take, the huge number of people who were accredited during the G20, and the amount of really interesting information which came out of it, I think the balance would be quite disappointing. And at the same time, you're wondering, shouldn't we have had much more journalists on the ground in Greece, for instance, or in Italy, or in Spain, actually explaining what's going on there? Not only the economic, the reasons of this economic crisis, but also the capacity of the people to swallow what they're going to be imposed with, the kind of medicine they're going to be imposed. Are they going to be ready to accept it? That kind of journalism about the consequences or the deep-rooted explanation for these crises is very often missing, and in fact that's why you have somehow a very strange unbalance of the journalists reflecting what the markets think, or what the governance thinks, what Sarkozy said or what Obama is going to say, etc., etc. And I think it's really becoming a problem. But mainstream journalists, especially in the written press, are trying to oppose that tendency, but it's very difficult because we're under pressure to constantly produce, quicker and shorter information.
Right. Well, and
so
journalists
becoming a big problem.
Aren't just writing one story a day anymore. They've got to write 3 blog posts, and then they have fewer resources available to them in terms of research staff. So, our reporters at even some of our flagship, media institutions around the world are just understaffed and under-resourced as the news model is changing so rapidly, and I think that contributes to this in a significant way. If I could just add one point to what you were saying, when I was at Media Matters, we did a study at the end of 2008 looking at the kind of the economic collapse and the meltdown and the coverage around it and we discovered that of the major, I believe it was the major cable news networks that were covering it, of all the segments they did on it over a 3 or 4 week period, only 6% of the guests, 6% of the guests that they had on were economists. Now, you fast forward to this past year, and this debt ceiling debacle that we had in this country, which I'm sure scared the rest of the world to death, and it should have. It scared me to death, that there was such brinksmanship being played, and it was being covered as kind of a he said, she said sort of thing. And again, Media Matters did a study, and in the period surrounding it, only 4% of the people that were actually brought on television, to talk about this were actually economists, were actually qualified to really talk about something that's actually science. And is not really just a political platform.
Right.
This is a typical problem. It's the formula, in my opinion, is kind of I report. Everybody can report. You have this.
Yeah.
You can take a picture. You take a video.
iPhones, iPads.
And so this is the typical idea of a kind of trend worldwide. It's that everybody can make this job. And sometimes I agree. I mean, if you see something really impressive, you can report. Of course, you can be a witness of the history. I don't want to say that we have a kind of elected group that study in a good university. Not everybody, but some of them of us. And then only you can explain the reality. This is absolutely absurd. But the opposite was absurd at all, because everybody can explain what's happening, because everybody say, who cares? I mean, I see, I can translate to other people. And this is, in my opinion, is quite dangerous.
Right. Well, we had people, cameras out on the street here in Occupy D.C., and we've asked people here in Washington what they think of the coverage of news issues, for example, like the G20, and here's what they had to say.
The G20 and the large countries in the European area will be able to fix the financial crisis, and I think it will drastically affect all of us here in the United States.
Well, people know that things are really going to get worse. I think we have these really smart leaders in there. These people have been working on things like this for their whole lives. Maybe the protests aren't going to do all that much, but at least it's an encouragement to say, we need to get something done now. But I think the people meeting at the G20 summit and people meeting throughout the world on these sort of issues are definitely smart enough and capable of fixing what's going on right now. The question is whether or not they're really going to agree and do it.
I guess I would like to think that they're, wanting to impact the world in a positive way, and, they're trying to make the right decisions for everyone. But just locally around, maybe just speaking from where I go to school, which is in D.C., I don't really see that having a...
Well, at least people know what the G20 is. I guess that's saying something to the benefit of the people on the street. But I want to return to this idea that of citizen reporters, but then there are journalists, people who are professional. Sure. It's one thing to take your camera out and put it on YouTube and get some police officer beating somebody at a demonstration, but putting it into context, giving the background to that story. The who, what, when, where, why, maybe the how. That's normally doesn't come along with the citizen reporting, which is basically like the old town crier during colonial America days. Go around and report, what he or I guess there maybe have been some women criers too. He or she had heard that day and would repeat it. But the mere fact that we have a lot of people out with these devices, I want to return to this, because how do you see the difference in reporting where the major media is not, as you said, they're not putting people in these various locations, Spain, Italy, Greece.
They do, but not enough.
Not enough, not enough.
And they do.
And without the resources that they've had in the past.
We do, but not as much as we used to. I mean, we're not doing exactly the same story, I'm afraid. I mean, it's a horrible feeling for the people like me who were working 15, even 20 years ago, and had a huge space to report, to write very in-depth story, and now we are reducing the space in papers, and the length of our stories. But we still, of course, I mean, I think the major newspapers are still sending people to Greece, Italy, Spain. I mean, you can see that in the New York Times. And for me, I mean, you have two ways to go. And I think the smart way, I would say, is to go the way the New York Times is going, because the New York Times remains in the U.S. the place where we go as foreign journalists to get information. I mean, if we want to verify something, we're not going to go to some blogs, even if we enjoy reading blogs or new websites and get some inputs from them. When we want to check on facts, when we want to write an important story, we go straight to the New York Times, go to the archives, look what they've done, and try to get inspiration from that. I'm talking about the U.S. obviously, because I'm reporting what's going on here, and I think for these papers to remain, I would say, fortress of knowledge and of journalism is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, if we do what is on Google that anyone can see, why go to the Figaro or Le Monde or the New York Times? And that's the only way, I think big newspapers are going to survive by still, putting input into journalism, because the citizen journalist is a very nice project, but to me it's a dangerous one. I mean, journalism is a profession. I mean, like being a lawyer, or it doesn't look as if it's as difficult as being a lawyer, but it is. It requires a lot of experience and deontology and rules of the game and critical mind, etc. I mean, a lot of different skills that you don't have immediately. I mean, you can of course develop them, but it's a profession.
Yeah, is one way to reach the readership of the traditional newspapers to expand what's offered on the internet, and then you get an issue. I know Rupert Murdoch couldn't figure out this business model. How do we make money on the internet? He knows how to charge money for the Wall Street Journal. But
I've seen, I think a few weeks ago, when perhaps I wasn't the first, it was online, really easy, a great video of 10 seconds. There was a young kid of 1 year, 2 years, something like this, that touched a magazine. And the father find out that for this kid, it was an iPad that didn't work. I mean, for him was. Have you seen this video? It's great. It's like a normal magazine. I mean, news magazine with a lot of photo. Yeah. For these kids, he was used. It's like my kids. They are used to touch a photo and something happens. The photo moves. In our culture, you see a photo and you say, "Great photo," and then you go on the other. And this is. I think this is a kind of anthropological movement and change. I think we were perhaps the last generation that we could read an article for 7, 8, 10 minutes. Okay. Usually now the teenager, they have a kind of barrier of attention of 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. It's a clip. Right. It's like I'm not find out big news. For a lot of people, a movie is too far. They prefer a TV serial of 10 minutes after minute. The idea is more or less the American football series. I mean, you need an action of 20 seconds. I find out, I'm sorry, but I don't want to talk about me, that my kids, after 1 year and a half of American culture, they don't like soccer. They tell me, for me it's a problem because I'm Italian. They say that it's
wait a minute, I grew up in the States and I played soccer my whole life. I'm a passionate advocate.
They say it's too slow. Nobody scores for half an hour. Yeah. I prefer American football. Every 2 minutes I have a score. And I try to say that, but you have an attack, you have a defense, and it's complicated to score. That's the fighting. When you score, it's a big news. Who cares? I want a lot of scores. For me, it's kind of journalism. Right. I agree with you. I mean, we like New York Times, I agree. But they are in a financial crisis. They have a big problem of crisis. And they make money with the subscriber that they touch the video on the website. And they love the blogger, and they love the video. If you see the New York Times, you can see a beautiful video every day in the web edition.
But that's okay.
I agree.
That's
I agree.
okay.
This is a big deal.
As long as they keep the quality.
I agree
of
with
course,
you.
they are in crisis.
But you need the video.
That's the challenge.
I agree with you.
As you say, they are in financial crisis, but are they going to reach a model? And that's okay. They have the videos. I mean, I think they should open to the videos.
I agree.
I mean, it's not because we change what we say the support. I mean, the media. I mean, because it's electronic that you should give up on the quality. That's what I'm saying.
I agree with you.
I'm saying the technology doesn't mean that you have to give up on your on the needs of the people who are reading this paper every day. I mean, you know, not only the people who go to watch the video, but on the people who need the New York Times to get informed. You know.
I agree with you. Then there's another problem about emotion and information. Sometimes it's really easy. You have a great emotion, people cried, great actress, and they looks like reality. And then you have to find out that not every emotion are true, and you have to. I think now our paradox is we have a lot of surface of information, sometimes too low and deep. I mean, it's a kind of big cup without nothing below.
Right, Eric, you wanted to.
Well, I mean, I just look. This is one of the most important, questions of our time, and not just with respect to people that care about journalism, but the people that care about democracy, not just here in the States but all over the world. How do you have, just so you look at the United States, how do you have a functioning democracy of 360 million people? That might be a little high, without an actual, referee that can kind of call the ball and say, okay, this is right, this is wrong. That's what the traditional kind of corporate-owned, media that we saw through, the 50s up through the last, say, 10 years provided for the United States, and I think it provided quite a bit of stability, even if it wasn't certainly perfect. The fact that we have this rise of citizen engagement, citizen journalism, I think is wonderful. People for the first time have access to their media. At Media Matters, I know, we empowered folks to be able to pick up the phone and call a producer at CNN and say, I don't like this story. People didn't have the ability to do that 15 years ago. What makes me very, very nervous is that when you have just a marketplace of information that's being flooded with information, at a certain point, right now, the New York Times is doing its best to kind of, set itself apart. But after a while, how do you really do that effectively? How do folks even know where the credible journalism is, and where you just have somebody blogging in their mom's basement without any real grounding in knowledge? And I think that's the real challenge: is we have to embrace the technology and embrace this empowerment that people feel, but then somehow really continue a tradition of journalism that means something, that allows us to actually have a discussion.
Right. Right. I also want to get into how the media is covering this Occupy Wall Street movement nationwide. And of course, we talked a little bit about how, people like stuff in, short bites, and also, what's to a lot of these 24/7 news channels, news when it's 3 days old is like fish. You got to get rid of it. And the possibility that Occupy Wall Street may become a story that is yesterday's news, and people don't want to cover it. But we had our cameras out on the street, and we happened upon one individual who is, of course, no stranger to anyone who likes ice cream. This is Ben Cohen from the Ben & Jerry's ice cream firm, who was asked the question about why Occupy Wall Street is so important.
Well, we're here to support Occupy DC. I think what they're saying is exactly right. The system is rigged to benefit corporations and wealthy people, and that's what needs to be changed. Since the Occupy started, well, it's great that this issue is finally front and center across America, that the rich people and corporations continue to make more and more money, and people in the bottom 99% are making less and less. Well, I think there's been a little bit of an inspiration there. I think there's a realization that it's kind of the same all over the world, that the world economic system has been set up essentially by the corporations for the corporations. Well, hopefully President Obama and Congress will start advocating some laws and some policies that make things a little fairer.
Well, except for public broadcasting, all the networks here, the 24/7s, are owned by corporations. I just want to ask you: do you see this as a news event, maybe getting ignored here soon? We see a lot of especially local television stations now starting to cover the fact that these demonstrators are leaving messes. There's trash piling up. Even Mayor Bloomberg was citing some health reasons why he had to go out and clear out, at least temporarily, Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan. But what do you see as the staying power as far as the media is concerned for this Occupy movement? Not just here, but we see it in Canada, and we see some other of these Occupy movements, maybe not as big, but in other parts of the world, Europe and Asia, for example.
I mean, I think all these articles you're mentioning about, it's dirty, or are they going to resist the cold? I mean, these are stories that, the journalists who are probably have to be there and report all the time are trying to find some angles they haven't done. But I think more on a deeper, angle, I think this movement is really interesting because it brought up it sort of made an eruption in the political debate in the U.S. and I think further about the question of money and politics, which is a key question in the U.S. I mean, I've been here for 3 years and it took me a while to understand to what extent there is this sort of interconnection between the political system and the way, the electoral system also works here, and big money and corporate money. And I think it's really interesting for me, I mean, as an observer who is pretty new, I mean, to Washington only 3 years, of having on the one side, these people just expressing in a very simple way in the street their real distrust and frustration at this question, of money and politics, and at the same time reading a book by a very savvy and interesting observer, the journalist Ron Suskind, the book Confidence Man, right. Which is a fascinating book because he really takes us from the time when Obama, in the middle of the crisis as a candidate, discovers the scope of the financial crisis and informed by some insiders in Wall Street who have decided to help this guy, this skinny guy who is appearing on the horizon. So he's ahead of the storm, and he's telling the story of how he's going to do to repair the financial system. And basically, he's saying at that time, I'm gonna do something. We're gonna regulate Wall Street. We can't go on like that, etc. And then he takes us through all the years of the Obama presidency and how basically he fails to organize a real regulation of this system. And he shows in a very impressive journalistic way, why, how the entourage of Obama is preventing Obama from going as far as he wants to go, the role of people like Geithner, Larry Summers, and the whole context of what we're seeing now in the streets in New York.
Well, and I should point out that Ron Suskind was roundly condemned by some of the media here, most notably the Washington Post, who attacked how he gathered his facts and how made some minor errors in the book, losing the sight of the fact that the Washington Post itself is a large corporation, and Warren Buffett is one of the biggest shareholders in the Washington Post company. And this gets back to how the news is reported through these corporate structures like the Post, which is no longer a news company. It's an education company. 75% of its revenue now comes from Kaplan Education Services, which has every interest in seeing public education collapse in the United States. But I want to get back into this discussion of corporate control. as Laurie pointed out. Susskind did I thought, a very good job in this book, but he was attacked by some of the other media conglomerates, especially the Post.
Coming back from her point about Occupy Wall Street, for me, it's really, from my point of view, European point of view, we are used to have a big rally of 100,000 people, and not like here. Sometimes here you have 500 people and say a big movement. For us, it's a kind of one condo that are protesting for water in the house. But not because we are bad, we are different, absolutely, I don't want to judge. For me, from my point of view, it's really important, really, really important, because in the media, thanks, I don't judge, but thanks to Occupy Wall Street, the Tea Party movement disappeared. We don't know which is Tea Party movement. We don't know where they meet. And I've seen when I arrived that from Europe, Obama was a kind of Jesus Christ superstar, and then we find out that everything was over after 6 months.
He's human after all.
Exactly. And I tried to explain writing. I said, it's a problem. He has a lot of problem. In my blog, Peter Costa, you are against Obama. No, not me. I tried to be witness that the people are against Obama. And then, thanks to Tea Party, he lost midterm election. And so, in my opinion, my question, but not only my question, people of abroad in Washington and the politics, if Occupy Wall Street can help in some way Obama campaign, or maybe recover to come back to be re-elected. I don't know exactly, because they are making, their goal is really it's really interesting and really ambitious. I mean, they are trying to discuss the capitalistic system. Mm-hmm. It's not in Italy we are more humble. We go against one government, one leader, one person, one idea, one law. Mm-hmm. Here they are discussing not only Obama and not only one law, not only one reform. They are discussing the pillar of capitalistic power that is the stock market and the money. And it's really interesting, and I want to see, because perhaps sometimes too high goals can be useful, can be unrealistic. And
look, I don't think there's any question that you know the White House suffered from probably an expectation that was placed on them that they were going to do too much, too fast, that was frankly just not realistic given the economic situation, the crisis, and the political
with Obama's health care being one of the pinnacle signature issues.
Yes, they just dragged on for entirely too long. I mean, I think that said, he's done a much better job as a president than he's certainly gotten credit for from either Democrats, Republicans, or in the media. But it's interesting that you guys brought up the Tea Party, because I think the Tea Party, when we talk about Occupy Wall Street, it's like the perfect counterpoint to this. And it really illustrates just how powerful certain aspects of the media are in the United States of America, but potentially all over the world. And I'm talking specifically about Fox News. And really, frankly, any entity owned by the Murdoch, family. I spent the better part of 2010, going on shows and trying to explain to folks and my fellow Americans that Fox News is not a news organization; it's a political operation. Absolutely. They act just like a political operation. They fundraise for candidates. They endorse folks. They put on rallies. I mean, they give essentially free commercials. They are unabashedly partisan and certainly loose with the facts is a.
And they use the motto "fair and balanced."
And they use the motto. Yeah, I mean, it's very Orwellian. It's very disingenuous. But if you consider that the Tea Party movement, which I think there was a lot of really, really concerned, angry, upset Americans that got swept up in something that had been, had actually been architected out several years before, that ended up being people, marching on the Capitol with guns and, calling the President of the United States, comparing him to Hitler and blaming all of this economic turmoil on our first black president, which is exactly where it didn't belong. It was a lack of government regulation, not too much government. I mean, it was just a complete, a complete play on the American people. And we all saw the results in the 2010 election. Now I think what's fantastic about Occupy Wall Street is that it is truly organic. I mean, it's truly come up on its own. The labor movement tried to come in and say, let us, lead this for you, and they said no. But I do think...
And there's no real leadership. That's
there is
the other
no real
thing.
leadership.
Yeah.
But I think that's good and bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good in that it gives them authenticity. But at a certain point, I think, both from a journalistic perspective and from a political perspective, they've got to do a little more to solidify where they're trying to go. We know they don't like money in politics, but they've got to turn that into political power. That is something that I will say the Tea Party did do effectively.
Right.
They put away the guns. They put away the ugly hate signs. They stopped spitting on civil rights leaders, and they've organized themselves into an incredibly powerful wing of the Republican Party. I don't think it's good for America. I don't think it's good for the Republican Party. We see the GOP presidential field that's a result of that, but it is a very tangible example of how a movement can be created, whether fabricated or funded or naturally, and can grab on and actually take hold and really cause political change. And Occupy Wall Street has the opportunity to do that for the better, but I think that they need to really be more aggressive in figuring out how to do that. Otherwise, I think the media will end up throwing them under the bus.
Well, certainly, they're all very good points. And the other thing we've heard about is with all this economic turmoil, people out on the streets all over the United States, big towns, medium-sized towns, even small towns, and then the financial collapse in Europe, in Greece, Italy. This is a time period at which people start talking about the next war, and get people's attention off of the domestic issues and look overseas. And certainly Russia and China have issued stern warnings to the West against any military action against Iran. Israel's been clamoring for such action, and if H.R., House Resolution 1905, passes the House, President Obama may see him and his diplomats unable to even seek a diplomatic solution with Iran. We have seen such war talk before, but is it different now with an election in gear and economies floundering in America and Europe? Let's talk about the war drums beating. There is certainly Netanyahu has been calling for his cabinet to approve a military strike on Iran. We had this interesting interchange, of course. We don't know what prompted it between Sarkozy and Obama and Khan, where Sarkozy said, I can't stand Netanyahu, he's a liar. And Obama said, well, I have to deal with him every day, something to this effect. And we also heard, we know that there's been this problem between Berlusconi, who's probably leaving, and Merkel, the chancellor. And then we had Sarkozy tell David Cameron to shut up or something at one other meeting, mind your own business. Are we, with this lack of statesmanship, I guess is the word for it, this isn't Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt at Yalta anymore. These are a bunch of people that are, making these comments. And with this clamoring for war with Iran, could we see things get out of control? And could we see potentially another war based on, well, it could be the International Atomic Energy Agency's contention that Iran's been fudging on the nuclear program, but are we in danger of seeing something start that no one can stop?
That's a difficult question. I guess, the Israelis have been, beating the drums for quite a while. I mean, it's not new for the Israelis to say that they are envisaging a strike in Iran. I mean, they've been thinking about it, I think, regularly and threatening to go for it. And I think in the Western capitals, there has been basically a general concern about what the Israelis could do if their attempts to stop the militarization of the Iranian nuclear program would fail. But I have difficulties in believing that an Obama, even in a difficult situation as it is politically at the moment for him in the country and with this economy in crisis, would be tempted to do it the George W. Bush way and certainly go for a confrontation, military confrontation with Iran. But I think that in the Obama administration there is very little appetite for any military intervention at the moment, and Obama has been totally obsessed with the idea of the American nation building. I mean, this has been really his motto. Getting out of Afghanistan.
You mean here, nation building here in the States, not elsewhere?
Not Afghanistan.
No, in America.
Yes, okay, good. Usually, that was George W. Bush.
Yes,
wanted
No, I was indeed saying nation building in the U.S.
Yes.
In the US. Did I say in Afghanistan?
Right.
Yes, but so he's retreating from Afghanistan. Clearly, the troops are leaving Iraq. So, but it's another thing. What could happen if the Israelis would go for intervention, and what would the Americans do at that point?
Because we're taking our troops out of Iraq, but some of them are being redeployed right there in the Arab Gulf region.
Exactly.
Kuwait, Qatar,
exactly. There
Emirates.
is a big dialogue with the Gulf countries and the U.S. How are we going to keep as many troops as we can in the Gulf in the event of a potential destabilization in the region, not necessarily in Iran, but any place.
Right.
So
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, we are not talking about a small country and a local war with the bad guy. We have to kill the bad guy. All the big alliance, world communities against this guy. Iran is
it's
one
not
of
Libya.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a big country, really important for all this region. Of course, everybody knows, and it's they have a lot of problem. I understand that Obama. I agree with her. I mean, Obama cannot imagine to open another war after closing 2 wars, and of course he has to. In this year, he has to save Jewish voters, and then he has to take care about this big alliance, of course, with the historical alliance with Israel. Have you seen what happened in the Bronx last month, 2 months ago? He lost a local election, but I agree with her. I mean, it's first of all, Iran is supported by China, by the Russians, so it's not. It's not easy to say, let's go and change this government.
Yes.
But I think, if just 1 minute, I think that there is, nobody wants to talk about it because it's a taboo, but I think that slowly the Western governments are starting to think that they're going to have a nuclear Iran at some point. I mean, they still are hoping, I think they were hoping, not so much now, that there could be a regime change that would change the whole the whole game in the Middle East. I mean, if the regime in Iran would fall, that would change the whole game, and that's what everyone has been waiting for. It
looks like China and Russia have drawn a line in the sand, to use the whole term.
Calm with sanctions.
Well, look,
exactly.
and you talk about regime change. I mean, look, we've seen over the last 10 years, there are inherent risks with regime change. I mean,
the green movement.
I think that George H.W. Bush looks smarter and smarter in the rearview mirror in the sense that he decided not to go after Saddam Hussein. He had him right where he wanted him, and not to say that he wasn't a brutal and horrible dictator, but you get into Iraq, and then what do? And we're gonna get out of it, and hopefully the provisional government can provide security. But if it descends into civil war, that's something that we could see all across the Middle East. And I really think we're sitting on a very dangerous, precarious situation, because it may not take the United States or China or Russia to act. It could take one of these actors in the region that then, it feels like we're all kind of backed up by our alliances. It feels very much kind of like, an eerie period before World War I.
Right. And Eric, you've covered the domestic politics. This is an election year.
Yes.
We've already seen the GOP candidates attack Obama for not publicly, I guess, rebuking Sarkozy, who called Netanyahu a liar. But we also see the Congress trying to tie the president's hands, saying, look, you can't negotiate with Iran unless you come to us for permission first, which is kind of unprecedented when you look at the president's powers, as you know, they've been amassed over several decades. But is this kind of a perfect storm situation where Obama's got to be really cognizant of electoral votes in places like Pennsylvania and Florida and Ohio, and could things get out of control where Israel takes advantage of the situation, hits Iran's nuclear facilities, and then we have no other choice but to bail them out if they get in trouble?
It certainly could.
Yeah.
We've seen them take unilateral action just in the last few years. God, I would hope that they would not do that, because I don't know that anyone really, can comprehend what would happen if Israel were to actually strike Iran. That would be an event of almost unfathomable proportion and consequence. But yes, Obama's got a very tricky line that he has to walk, because let's face it, the American people have been very, very supportive of Israel and should be supportive of Israel, but that doesn't mean that Israel's right 100% of the time. And if we're going to kind of ultimately solve the problem, the core problem, the Palestinian-Israeli issue, there's going to have to be give on both sides. And the way that the politics are being played, domestically here in the States, it just doesn't allow for that. Both parties are really, beholden to the Israel lobby, and it's that's about the only place where you can go in the Republic of the right or the left, and the things aren't much different.
Right.
But we've got to get out of that view, and this is the kind of stuff that if good journalists had the resources to be able to really dig into this and write the kind of pieces or film the kind of documentaries or pieces for the evening news that really kind of dug into this a little bit and explained not just, hey, here's what happened today, here's a bit and a bite of information, but strung some of these things together into a narrative to really tell a story. I think the American people would have a much better sense of what's going on, what the stakes are, and what the dangers are.
Right. Well, this question was also posed to some of the people here at Occupy DC, and here's one of the answers.
I mean, if I was Iran, I'd be very worried about the United States and Israel. They're certainly getting more belligerent. They're pushing the pressure up, and I am not surprised that China and Russia are speaking out against it. I think a war with Iran would be terrible for the country. It'd be bad for the United States and bad for Iran. It's a no-win situation in that, but it does seem like there's a continuing drumbeat for that kind of activity. I hope it's not to divert attention from things like this, like these occupations across the country where people are getting organized for the first time and starting to criticize both domestic and foreign policy. So often to knock something like that off the front page, they start a war. The U.S. has been pushing on Iran for a long time. It's really about the geopolitical game of empire. And I don't mean the words of the game in a kind of a light way. It's a very serious game. And if you look at Iran, where it's located is very important for controlling critical resources for the next 20 years. And the dominance of that region has come down to a battle between the United States and its allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel, against Iran, which has made a lot of advancements with the Iraq War being such a disaster.
Well, meanwhile, the mud is being flung fast and furious in the GOP presidential race. Is this comedy going to be going to turn off American voters who have to deal with some real bread and butter issues? Now, we talk about Fox News, but all the networks were concentrating on Herman Cain, who's formerly a CEO of a pizza company, Godfather's Pizza. And he's had what we used to call during the Clinton administration a bimbo eruption, with several women claiming
a bimbo eruption.
Several bimbo eruptions. Well, not to say they're all bimbos, but anyway. But we've seen we've seen this before with other candidates. Certainly, Michelle Bachmann, and then there was Rick Perry's strange news conference or speech given in New Hampshire. But people look at this and they say that the American presidential race is now a combination of Survivor and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and American Idol. Mm-hmm. This is a reality TV show more than anything else.
Obama said exactly this.
Yes.
I'm waiting for the...
Well, I was actually joking that, Casey Affleck, Ben Affleck's younger brother, directed the movie with Joaquin Phoenix that was kind of the farce about the de-evolution of him. And I kind of wondered at one point if Casey Affleck was secretly directing the GOP primary. We were going to find out it was all just kind of a farce. But I think we're seeing something really unprecedented in modern politics, and it's happening really on the right. And that is, and it's fed by Fox News, and it's fed by the culture that Fox News has really created and really driven, because I think people don't realize how much of an influence they have in the party and in the movement, or how much they direct it. You essentially have a group of folks that are running for president that refuse to accept or face any consequences of anything that they have done or anything that they have said, and they have said and done some pretty outlandish and absurd and crazy things. Things that even, in 2000, probably would have disqualified them from the race. I think that there's no question Rick Perry should be disqualified from being president. He's demonstrated such poor character and such bad judgment. Herman Cain. Can we imagine? Can you imagine if Bill Clinton had four women come out over the course of a week? Whether one of them turns out to be true or not. Right. The fact that he's up there just kind of saying, hey, I make no apologies. I'm being, accused by my enemies, and I'm raising lots of money. His response is, hey, I'm raising lots of money. That's kind of become a justification in this culture that we're in, and I think it's a very frightening thing politically, and it's something that is a definite product of the of the decline of real journalism that not real journalism, but forceful journalism that can really hold candidates accountable to the interests of the people. And right. I don't know what we do about it.
Right. I agree with him because this is my first primary. I just moved from Europe, and I love politics. My education is politics, but Italian European politics. I was really I am at all really excited to understand what's happening, how this guy tried to gain votes, to gain media cover, and really I'm quite disappointed because tonight I will cover the number 6 debate, public debate, mm-hmm. national public debate, and I try to find not only a joke, a line, a headline, or something funny. I try to say, okay, this is the Republican Party really will be able to win. We are talking about a really tight race. We're not talking about something crazy.
They have a shot. If they can put forward
exactly.
an electable candidate, exactly. They actually have a shot.
I don't see, unfortunately, in this case I judge. I'm sorry, but sometimes you have to judge. I don't see at the moment, perhaps in the future can change, an idea of America that has to make effort with the G2, with China, with the G20, with the financial crisis, with the new global order. In the future there will be big challenges, not only debt ceiling or something like this. I'm talking about the paper of the role of United States in the future. And when I see this debate, or they are making fun between them because they know that they need, or they have no idea. Also Mitt Romney, that is perhaps the best, the front runner. Everybody says that he will be the guy. Yeah? At the moment, I don't see some vision that I can say can be.
Look, that's incredible. That's incredibly.
But perhaps astute. I don't understand.
No. Are you kidding? Look, that's an incredibly astute observation. We don't have a vision for America in this country anymore. And I think that's why we're having this kind of, this very, very disturbing moment that I think every American feels. It's uncertain. It's a little frightening. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. We've decimated our middle class. We've had a massive wealth redistribution. No one can really look at the parties and understand who is for what and what each one means. Both parties are striving for meaning. The Republicans can't just be against Barack Obama. They can't just be against the first black president. They've got to actually be for something. And and they've got, frankly, a cast of idiots up there running for president.
Let me ask you, how do you know what your readership in Europe wants to get out of the American presidential campaign? Because they do seem to be getting more and more ridiculous as we go along, and I mean, it's a different kind of politics as what you would have in a parliamentary system, but
I mean, the Berlusconi politics, I'm sorry, it's not much better than the Keynes one.
Yes, are we seeing
sex scandals, and I mean, I think...
And Strauss-Kahn, of course, Dominique Strauss-Kahn in France, who was a president.
Dominique Strauss-Kahn
So are we seeing it level out? Is that basically what your readership... where maybe at one time they wouldn't want to really, because I remember people saying, look, we don't really care about Clinton's private life back in the 90s, but now is there an interest in that with your readership?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, in Europe we have our really funny stories and political circus as well, and I think the political circus is probably something which was happening 50 years ago and 100 years ago and 150 years ago, but it was just not maybe as visible. But there are lots of really funny stories, in the past as well.
Yes.
So I don't think we should over-exaggerate, having great, political leaders in the past, and now we have only petty ones. Is it really true? I'm not sure.
No, I think we just know a lot more about people than we ever knew before.
Right. So we're seeing maybe the leveling of the transatlantic playing field when it comes to coverage, or at least interest in these.
I think there is a big, to come back to your question, I think there is a big interest still in American politics, because the Europeans, and that's interesting, the French and the Italians, and all the Europeans understand that what is at stake in America is huge.
Absolutely.
And, in the past we used to say that the Europeans were anti-American, they were, not very happy with this big superpower. They were trying to build up a sort of counterbalance with the European Union. Now they see the European Union is in big trouble. It's not a political power, absolutely not. It's a divided union with huge problems and no real goal as well. So they really understand that the U.S. is key and what's going to happen. And they see this country...
That keynote of yours will have to be the final word, because we are out of time. And I want to thank our panel for joining us this week. And that will do it for this week's Deadline. Please join us again next week for another critical review of the week's news coverage. I'm your host, Wayne Madsen.